Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into it. Today, we're exploring this incredibly fascinating intersection. We're looking at how the actual mechanics of language learning overlap directly with the science of memory and human persistence. To do this, we're going to be using a very specific, highly structured academic framework. Specifically, we'll be breaking down Unit 1 of the Albalka Applied English Curriculum, which is entirely dedicated to the theme of learning and memory. But before we even touch on the mechanics of grammar or vocabulary, we need to set the stage. We really need to talk about mindset.
So, how close are you to success without even realizing it? Seriously, take a second to really think about that. We so often view learning, especially something like mastering a new language or wrapping our heads around a complex topic, as this straight uphill climb where progress is always obvious. But what if it's not? What if those moments where you feel completely stuck are actually the exact moments right before a massive breakthrough? I'm asking you this because making that shift from being a passive viewer to engaging in active personal reflection is absolutely the first step to truly acquiring new knowledge.
And that perfectly tees up this quote from Thomas Edison. Many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. Now, what's really wild here is that this is actually the very first thing presented in our source materials student file for this unit. Why would an English curriculum start with an inventor? Well, it's because mastering a language, improving your memory, and actually retaining information isn't just about raw intellect. It is deeply, fundamentally rooted in the exact persistence that Edison is describing right here. Because if you give up right before the finish line, well, all the grammar mechanics in the world aren't going to save you.
All right, let's move right along to Section 1. Welcome to Applied English.
So our source text today, the Albalka Applied English course, it isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill language guide. This is a highly structured, university-level document. It was put together by a dedicated technical academic committee, and it's specifically designed for pre-intermediate learners. We're going to focus exclusively on Unit 1, which tackles learning and memory. And this is exactly where we transition from those abstract ideas about success into the concrete, actual syllabus of how a university structures the acquisition of knowledge.
Which brings us to Section 2, your Unit 1 roadmap.
The crucial takeaway here is how this curriculum brilliantly weaves these high-level cognitive concepts directly into standard language skills. Like if you look under reading on page 6, you aren't just reading random fictional stories. The texts are specifically about information retention and Alzheimer's disease. Then when you get to listening on page 17, the audio exercises focus on mnemonics, those mental tools that help you remember things, and the actual mechanics of listening itself. It's essentially a double layer of learning. You are practicing your English by studying exactly how the brain learns, and sometimes, tragically, how it forgets.
Okay, let's jump into Section 3, key learning objectives.
Now, every good explainer, and honestly every good course, needs clear objectives. Don't think of these as boring academic chores. Think of them as your actionable map to mastery. Steps 1 through 4 are all about laying that foundation. You have to use the simple present tense correctly, and you've got to be able to form WH questions: who, what, where, when, why. But check out Step 3, recognize collocations. Collocations are simply words that naturally appear together. Mastering a language isn't just about memorizing a dictionary, it's about knowing which words naturally stick together in the mind. And then Step 4 focuses on the correct use and ordering of adjectives, so you can add real detail to your thoughts.
So let's see how all of this builds into active application. Because let's be real, those mechanics we just talked about are completely useless if you never actually apply them. Step 5 requires you to sit down, read, and truly understand passages on our core topics. Step 6 and 7 push you to actually produce your own work, meaning writing original paragraphs using that simple present tense and the new vocabulary you'll be encountering. And finally, Step 8 dials right in on pronunciation, specifically recognizing consonant sounds. You can really see the flow here, right? It goes from structure to recognition to comprehension and finally to active creation. Which leads us nicely into Section 4, vocabulary for active learning. Listen, these are absolutely not just random words to memorize for test. They are the literal tools you need to talk about learning itself. Let's compare two really crucial verbs from the source's fill-in-the-blank exercise: retain versus acquire. The source material points out that there are specific methods to help you retain information, which means to actually keep it locked in your brain. On the flip side, we're introduced to a student character, Sasan, who is actively taking a course to acquire many new skills. So you acquire the new stuff, and then you use methods to retain what you've just built. Make sense? Now, what I find incredibly interesting here is the curriculum's heavy emphasis on focused analog attention. In one of the vocab exercises, there's a character named Anna who is advised to just check the internet for answers. But the very next sentence in the test makes this bold, unavoidable demand. Before answering the questions, it is important that you read the text. Not skim it, not quickly search the internet for the answer, read it. In a world completely full of shortcuts, ultimate academic success requires you to actively read and focus on the source material right in front of you.
Let's look at another pair of words demonstrated by the characters in the text, engaged versus grasp. We get this great little mini narrative about a guy named Amir. After an entire hour, Amir was still deeply engaged in a conversation with his tutor. He was locked in, he was actively participating. And then we have Mike. The text tells us that it was only after reading the full article that Mike was able to finally grasp the concept. Do you see the relationship there? You have to stay engaged, like Amir, so that ultimately you can grasp those complex ideas just like Mike.
And this brings us to the real-world stakes of everything we've been talking about today. The source material, it really doesn't shy away from the hard challenges of learning and memory. The vocabulary exercises actually mention a student, Tom, who needs to improve his grades to move up to the next level, which is, a very standard academic pressure. But then it goes deeper. It introduces sentences about individuals having difficulty reading because they have a learning disability, specifically mentioning dyslexia. It even touches on severe memory conditions, literally asking students to identify Alzheimer's disease when describing a situation where someone's memory is failing. The language we are learning here gives us the vocabulary to discuss the entire spectrum of human cognition, from just passing a test all the way to understanding deep neurological health. All right, which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. We started off with Thomas Edison reminding us that success is very often just one single step past the point where we desperately want to give up. We've looked at the structured roadmap, we've broken down the learning objectives, and we've explored the exact vocabulary you need to talk about acquiring and retaining knowledge. So, my question for you is, now that you've been given the roadmap, are you ready to engage, focus, and retain? The entire framework is right there. The rest of it is entirely up to your persistence. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep learning.